So it goes something like this. A set of unlucky individuals are chained up in a dark cave, their heads held facing forward their entire lives, only able to see shadows projected by firelight. There must be stagehands or such moving props around in front of the firelight so the show doesn't get boring, but the story doesn't really focus on that. Instead, the implication is that they get to see all things, but only as shadows flattened against the wall. A sort of minimalist variety show, a never-ending telethon combined with Chinese shadow play. I'm sure you know the story. This allegory comes to us through layers of mediation. You probably heard it like I did, first anecdotally in grade school, maybe with a cartoon. Then, if you took AP classes, went to private school, or studied humanities in college, you might have read the original. Plato's Republic, we are told, is Plato writing down from memory dialogues of his teacher Socrates. And in the remembered dialogue, Socrates himself is remembering a 300-page conversation he had with some friends the night before. The allegory of the cave comes up in Book 7, and it's really just a small point along the way of Socrates' argument that philosophers should rule the world and be much more respected. But that's not usually how the story comes to us. If you did college media studies or art theory or film or communications, especially at the tail end of the broadcast era like I did, Plato's allegory of the cave is told as an allegory of television, or mainstream ideology culture at large. It is an illustration of the medium is the message, and it's certainly true that if you spend your life chained up in a cave, the nature of the medium is very important. It goes something like this. The shadows are like all of culture media that together create an entire world of ideology, expectations, identity, and suffering. The fire worked quite nicely as a metaphor in the broadcast age. It was all that light coming out of the TV piped in from faraway LA. It was never agreed upon specifically who these stagehands were making these shadow plays. Most people suspected the rich or the government or maybe executive producers. There's another important part of the story. One of these cave watchers gets an education in the real world, shown around the fire and then outside on a sunny day. At first it sucks, but he gets to like it, although he has a hard time keeping up relations with his old friends back in the cave. They don't believe him, and now he finds the cave movies unengaging. Socrates thinks the libertine a stand-in for the misunderstood enlightened philosopher. Media theorists think of him as the enlightened media theorist, or maybe the underpaid media artist. To sum it up in the words of McLuhan, the serious artist is the only person able to encounter technology with impunity, just because he is an expert aware of the changes in sense perception. How this allegorical sunshine of media enlightenment might look goes something like this. If avant-garde artists can take the larger media apparatus into their own hands, not just the cameras and the editing equipment, but also the cinemas and distribution and the whole production cycle, then they can deconstruct and critique and creatively realize media criticism through praxis, creating an alternative fire in the cave that breaks the chains of consumer ideology. What Gene Youngblood called in 1970 an expanded cinema of many screens and holographs that must move into a, quote, newer extra-objective territory. What Francois Lyotard called for in 1973 an a-cinema that shocks our consumerist identification through aberrant movement in cuts and movement's absence in the tableau vivant. New juxtapositions like those called for by Gilles Deleuze in 1983, the time image. Stan Brakhage channeled Homer in a 1978 statement calling upon the true spirit of cinema to be found in abandoning standard optical perspective by spitting on the camera lens. He calls out, "O transparent hallucination, superimposition of image on image, mirage of movement, heroine of 1001 Nights, the devout who break popcorn together in your humblest double feature services know that you are still being born. Search for your spirit in their dreams and dare only dream when in contact with your electrical reflections. Unknowingly, as innocent, they await the priests of this new religion, those who can stir cinematic entrails divinely. They await the prophets who can cast with the precision of Confucian sticks the characters of this new order across filmic mud. All this is to say that, through new independent production and distribution, artists could create a dialectic in the cave and maybe save the world. Socrates liked dialectics too. So much so that the big interlocutor Thrasymachus accuses him of just being annoyingly ironic. It is a fair criticism, but Plato can wax on as well as Brakhage about the goals of the dialectic. And so with dialectic, when a person starts on the discovery of the absolute by the light of reason only, and without any assistance of sense, and perseveres until by pure intelligence he arrives at the perception of the absolute good, he at last finds himself at the end of the intellectual world, as in the case of sight at the end of the visible. There is a problem with the particulars these philosophers and artists seek as a recipe for freedom and the true dialectic. We have, for the most part, achieved them, all of them. Socrates lauds the ideal forms of mathematics, 2D geometry, and 3D astronomy. He says, quote, "Although they make use of the visible forms and reason about them, they are thinking not of these, but of the ideals which they resemble, not of the figures which they draw, but of the absolute square and the absolute diameter, and so on. The forms which they draw or make are converted by them into images, but they are really seeking to behold the things themselves, which can only be seen with the eye of the mind." Well, now they can. They can render them, and in 4K HD video. As Youngblood predicted, cinema has achieved a newer extra-objective territory. We have gone from this to this. But it's not a transcendent synesthesia, but Pixar. We have the predicted multiple screens and holography, web pages, and Oculus Rift. For Lyotard's aberrant motion, we have a world of looping GIF animations playing endlessly. For the entire microcinema movement of independent production and distribution, we have instant, ubiquitous, free, networked, amateur, accessible, multiple channels of internet video, smartphones, augmented reality, and Google Glass. This is a little disappointing. Transcendent enlightenment, whether communist or spiritual, material or existential, doesn't seem to be happening. I teach 20-year-old college students. Growing up with the internet doesn't seem to have made the difference. The new generations have certainly gotten less punk and ironic. They don't seem to be free of mainstream ideology. We're still in the cave. What happened to the plan? We can ask, what are shadows in the age of the virtual? Well, first it seems we have left the age of the avant-garde in art and entered an age of design with a capital D as in TED.
Augmented reality is the melding of the real world with computer-generated imagery. It seems the perfect medium to investigate magic. And as
kitsch that has subsumed the vacuum of art's rejection of technology, programmatically designing virtuals and ideals, data visualization, virtual realities. Vilém Flusser, writing about design in the 90s instead of art and film in the 70s, is more cynical than his media theory forebears. He sees more a future of shadows, not of transcendent ideal philosophers. He announces an overdue end to modernism in his essay on memory, electronic or otherwise. He says, quote, "The ideology of the self has been long to perish. It should have vanished with psychoanalysis, with neurophysiology, and with other results which show that there is no hardcore within us, but this ideology remained until artificial intelligences were invented. It can no longer prevail unless it admits that machines have cells. Our praxis with electronic memories forces the abandonment of the self upon us. There is no need for history or selves or the sun shining above the cave when we can visualize math and data. Why play outside when there are video games? The fire of the allegory, which we thought might be those manipulative rich people, is actually the machine itself. The ideology is us. No matter where you go, there you are, even if you leave the cave." The other current design vector is to play in the cave, augmented reality. And this is the part of the talk when finally I arrive at the medium as the message moment. AR is inherently a dialectic of virtual and real, a sort of after cinema in which the viewer must take on the role of the projector, enter into the apparatus, become part of the machine. In terms of the allegory, we get to be stagehands and spectators at the same time, watch the shadows and also the fire make the shadows. In AR, the viewer must interact, work to inhabit their virtual role. Their presence as perceived by the machine has limits and boundaries, the scope of the sensors, the range of their sensibility, the particular actors which cause reactions. If you watch someone interact with an AR object, this is their first activity, a sort of calibration of proprioception, testing the boundaries of their virtual body. What causes reaction? What is repeatable? What is noise? What is allowed, escapable, invisible? What freedom remains to the body? The viewer must be recognizable to the machine or interface. Instead of trying to provide an alternate media that moves beyond the apparatus, AR installs the apparatus and allows the viewer to inhabit an alternate role: the camera, the director, the screen, the model. Like cave allegory stagehands, we are allowed to play a role in the media machine, bring it to our places, our images, our objects, our bodies. But the price of entrance is the transformation of the human to the machine. Like this performance happening now, the human given the function to reveal each image to the machine, to be seen. So can we ever become true philosophers? Can AR help us become so? To the extent that AR helps us with media criticism, I think so. I believe Socrates when he talks of criticism. What we know and are able to distinguish matters. Dogs are good philosophers, he says. They respect knowledge and bark at strangers. In this 2,500-year-old dialogue, he puts a call out for a more critical design technology discourse, something beyond TED Talks, a design avant-garde. I quote, "This is the distinction which I draw between the sight-loving, art-loving, practical class and those who are alone worthy of the name of philosopher."
How do you distinguish them?
The lovers of sounds and sights are, as I conceive, fond of fine tones and colors and forms and all the artificial products that are made out of them, but their mind is incapable of seeing or loving absolute beauty.
Few are able to attain the sight of this.
Very true. And he who, having a sense of beautiful things, has no sense of absolute beauty, or who, if another lead him to a knowledge of that beauty, is unable to follow, of such a one I ask, is he awake or in a dream only? Reflect, is not the dreamer, sleeping or waking, one who likens dissimilar things, who puts the copy in the place of the real object?
I should say such a one was dreaming.
But take the case of the other, who recognizes the existence of absolute beauty and is able to distinguish the idea from the objects which participate in the idea, neither putting the objects in the place of the idea nor the idea in the place of the objects. Is he a dreamer or is he awake?
He is wide awake.